Right, hello guys. So in today's video we're going over a Stasis Hunter build that's very much a return to the classic Stasis Hunter builds of old, but with an improved modern shakeup that puts it above its previous iterations. Despite not being on Prismatic or taking advantage of exotic class items, this build is still very much able to hold its own in even the highest levels of endgame content. And to prove it, the gameplay you'll be seeing today is a mix between the Fallen Saber Grandmaster Nightfall, Master Lost Sectors, and general play. So what exactly is the build going to offer you? For starters, this build focuses heavily on maintaining as much uptime as possible on our Coldsnap Grenade. Now, the reason for this is because alongside the final shape, the grenade altering properties of the Touch of Winter aspect were buffed specifically for Coldsnap grenades. Now, each time an enemy is frozen by the Coldsnap, the Seekers duplicate and create medium and large Stasis Crystals on the second and third chain respectively, which as a result has massively buffed the crowd control capability of this grenade. Really, it feels like all you need to do now is throw one grenade into a group of ads and then the entire room gets frozen, ready and waiting to be promptly detonated. So let's find out how we can most optimize this setup, starting with our subclass configuration. Since we're on the pure Stasis subclass, we don't have a choice of super ability, but what we do have is really quite excellent. Silence and Squall received a really nice buff in the final shape that ended up increasing the Squall Storm travel speed by 10%, as well as a hefty damage and slow stack build-up buff of about 40%. These changes have turned an already S-tier AdClear Super into an absolute crowd control monster, even in GM Nightfalls. When it comes to the rest of our abilities, we're taking Gambler's Dodge to refund our Withering Blades every time we dodge near an enemy. For our melee, we're locked to Withering Blade, and as I mentioned at the beginning, our grenade of choice is the Coldsnap Grenade. As far as aspects are concerned, our first is of course Touch of Winter to give us that improved Coldsnap behavior, and then for the second we have Grim Harvest. Grim Harvest is going to make it so defeating slowed or frozen targets creates stasis shards. With the update to the Harvest aspects in the final shape, now each time we collect a stasis shard, on top of the original 10% melee energy, we're also granted a small amount of health and stacks of frost armor. The amount of health really is quite minuscule, but the main thing we're here for is the melee energy and the frost armor, which at the maximum of 8 stacks is a 36% damage resist. There is a cap on how many shards can be active at once. It's actually 6, and then a 10-second cooldown is incurred until you can make 6 again. But with how things are going to work, this actually lines up pretty nicely with how often we get our grenade back, so it doesn't affect the build much at all. Now let's talk fragments. First off, we're taking Whisper of Rime, which is going to increase the maximum number of stacks of frost armor we can hold from 5 to 8. This is what's going to allow us to reach that maximum 8 stacks and that 36% damage resist. Next up, we have Whisper of Fissures, which is pretty standard in most stasis builds. This is going to increase the size and damage of the burst of stasis whenever we destroy a crystal or shatter a frozen target. Up next, we have our most important fragment, Whisper of Shards, that's going to increase our base grenade regeneration rate by an additional 500% or 6 times the base value upon destroying a stasis crystal, which is vital for keeping our Coldsnap Grenade on as low a cooldown as possible. With the update to the grenade combined with our upcoming weapon choice, we're basically going to have this fragment active 24/7. Included among the numerous changes to stasis came an update to our next fragment, Whisper of Torment. Whisper of Torment grants 7% grenade energy on a 1-second cooldown every time we take damage. But now, if we also have any amount of frost armor, this gets increased to 12% grenade energy, also on a 1-second cooldown. This is nice because for simply having frost armor, which we will have basically all the time, this fragment is now giving almost double grenade energy compared to its base form for simply taking damage. Yet another fantastic way for us to continue looping our Coldsnap Grenade. Finally, our last fragment is going to be Whisper of Rending. Whisper of Rending is simply going to allow our primary weapons to deal 100% or double damage to Stasis Crystals, as well as 50% increased damage to frozen enemies. This quite nicely offsets the negative 5% penalty primary weapons get versus frozen enemies. So that about does it for our abilities. Now let's move on to the weapons. First of all, for your primary slot, you do have an element of choice. Your first option is a Stasis Primary with Headstone that will allow you to create a Stasis Crystal upon scoring a precision kill, in which case I would very much recommend the brand new Bold Endings Heavy Burst Hand Cannon from the Pale Heart, because it comes with a rather fitting to the build role of Headstone Demolitionist, meaning that for every kill we get with it, we're going to receive a small chunk of our grenade back. The other option is the Stasis Exotic Scout Rifle Wicked Implement, since once again, if you have the Catalyst, it also gets Headstone, but on top of that, you receive a tracking Stasis Shard after defeating a slowed or frozen enemy. So yes, you do lose the grenade bonus that you'd get with Demolitionist, but instead you gain a ranged way of receiving healing, melee energy, and frost armor, which for something like a GM is rather invaluable. As for our other weapons, it doesn't really matter, just make sure that if you're doing any champion-based content, you match your anti-champion weapons accordingly. For example, in the GM Nightfall gameplay, I was using Bold Endings and Cloud Strike, since currently we have Overload Hand Cannon and Anti-Barrier Sniper. Lastly, I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but if you do happen to have Buried Bloodline,
Oh shit. Here we go again.
it does complement the build quite nicely with the additional healing and grenade energy it provides with Devour. But I've had enough people screaming at me to not mention this weapon, editor included, which is why all the gameplay you're seeing doesn't include it. Now let's talk about our choice of exotic armor, and I bet it's been a while since you've seen this exotic mentioned, and yes, it is of course the Mask of Bakris. Mask of Bakris is going to replace our dodge with a unique shift ability that converts it into a short-range teleport that makes you invisible and invulnerable for the length of its animation. But the main part that we're here for is the additional 11 seconds of ×4 Arc and Stasis weapon surge after exiting the shift. This is going to improve the damage of our Arc and Stasis weapons by 25%, which if you're using bold endings is just going to make ad clearing your frozen enemies far more efficient. Our mod setup is also going to make spamming the light shift much easier, but before we get into that, let's quickly talk stats. Stats to prioritize are resilience, then discipline, then recovery, then mobility. Honestly though, the most important thing is having 100 discipline so that our grenade comes back the fastest, at least from a stat maxing point of view. Alright then, now let's go over our mod setup. For the helmet, we're taking Stasis Siphon to make orbs on double kills with whatever Stasis primary you choose to use, and double Dynamo for an extra 4% super energy whenever we shift near enemies. As for our gauntlets, I have a single Stasis loader, Impact Induction to provide 12% grenade energy on melee hit, and Focusing Strike for another 12% class ability energy on melee hit. On the boots, we have Elemental Charge so that our armor charge can be increased by collecting Stasis shards, stacks on stacks to double the amount we get from Elemental Charge or simply collecting an orb, and recuperation for a health boost after collecting an orb. Finally, for the class item, we're starting with Utility Finisher. This will allow a finisher with 3 armor charges to return 70% of our class ability energy. The best time to use this is once the weapon boost from the light shift is over though, since if you try using it during the light shift, you won't receive any energy back. The reason this happens is because for the whole duration of the weapon surges, your class ability energy is permanently fixed at 0%. No source of energy will increase it regardless of how hard you try, so it's best to wait to throw any Withering Blades or finish targets until the surges are over. We're also taking Reaper so that any subsequent weapon kills after a light shift spawn an orb, and Bomber for an extra 12% grenade energy whenever we light shift. Alright then, let's wrap things up on the technical side with our choice of artifact perks. In column 2, we're taking Authorized Mod Elemental Charge to reduce the cost of Elemental Charge to 1. In column 3, we have Elemental Siphon so that multi-kills with bold endings spawn a Stasis Shard, and Creeping Chill to create an extra slowing burst whenever we defeat slowed or frozen enemies with our Stasis weapons. In column 4, we're going to want Counter Energy for a nice 25% ability energy to our least charge ability whenever we stun a champion, which is going to be great for any GM or champion inclusive content. And finally, in column 5, we're also going to be wanting Shield Crush. Shield Crush will make it so whenever we have Frost Armor, our Withering Blade will recharge 25% faster and deal 25% more damage. I also took Sniper's Meditation, so my Cloud Strike was dealing more damage in the GM run we did, on top of the 25% it gets from Mask of Bakris. So before I let you go, what's the optimal gameplay loop for this build? First of all, you should start an engagement by placing your Coldsnap Grenade. Then light shift to buff your weapons and go to town, breaking every crystal the eye can see, as well as forming new ones with your Headstone weapon. Keep in mind that breaking crystals massively accelerates the regeneration rate of your grenade, so do that as often as you can, and remember that only once your surges disappear from light shift you're allowed to start throwing Withering Blades and performing utility finishes to get your next shift back. As soon as you generate your super, you should use it at your earliest convenience to keep the battlefield under control. Some other notes include making sure to shift near enemies so you get the bonus from Dynamo, and just remember to collect your orbs and Stasis shards. As always, there will be a dim link at the top of the description if you want to copy the build hassle-free. One more thing, I'm sure we're all aware of the news surrounding Bungie recently, but just a couple days ago, the Destiny 2 team Twitter account announced that they're developing a solution that will allow players to chase specific perks on their exotic class items. So I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on what type of build videos you're wanting to see from the channel. Currently, I've been trying to make videos that either include Prismatic but don't feature class item roles, or just don't include Prismatic at all, like in today's video. So if you could leave a comment letting me know what specifically you'd want to see from a build video, like for example, no class items allowed, pure subclass and non-Prismatic builds, or now that the news has broken, do you want to start seeing some nasty class item combos? Do let me know in the comments below. Anyway, that's all for today, so I hope you enjoyed the build, and I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Your support means the world. And if you're really into the content I create, consider becoming a member of the channel, which not only lets you support me in the best way possible, it also nets you a whole host of awesome perks along with it. A massive shout out to these members up on screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.